Right now, we're dealing with severe acute respiratory syndrome (SARS) among animals on planet Earth. The truth of what causes it may actually be researched and investigated under a false idea. This can be deduced from the situation of past outbreaks of infectious diseases during World War I. The Spanish flu-influenza Spanish flu. The Spanish flu-influenza caused an extremely high number of deaths around the world in 1918 to 1920. Records show that the war ended in order to combat this pandemic infection. It is estimated that about 600 million people worldwide were infected with the disease and 20 to 40 million died. At that time, the world population was around 2 billion people, so 30% of the human population was infected. It is now reported that the influenza virus was the cause of the infection. Perhaps pathological tissue samples of past patients may have been left behind. Past tissue samples should have been identified as the cause of the disease using the methods of modern science. Influenza virus infection is always characterized by pathological findings of respiratory and gastrointestinal abnormalities and disorders, as well as high fever. The age of onset of the disease is usually under teenagers. This may be due to an underdeveloped immune system. There is a record of an epidemic period. It lasted from about 3 months to 6 months. The only recorded infectious disease in human history is the Spanish flu-influenza. At the time, no one knew that the virus existed. Therefore, researchers were searching for the bacteria that caused the disease. Vaccines against some of the bacteria were developed. Moreover, they found some effectiveness against treatment and prevention. In other words, there is no fundamental cure for a phenomenon that cannot be explained by science. Human race is being wrong about the reason for something or the way to achieve COVID-19 treatment. I think it's barking up the wrong tree. Thus, the cause is virtually unknown for an infection with pneumonia as the primary symptom that has occurred since the winter of 2019. Coronavirus infection. Because of the similarity in genetic structure of a coronavirus called SARS virus that originated in the patient's tissue a decade ago. However, according to tests using the detection of specific genes in coronavirus bodily fluids, almost everyone who tests positive has no morbid findings. In other words, they are not sick. Socially interpreted, they are infected with a pathogen and are a source of infection. But medically speaking, they are healthy. We don't know if it's hiding in a gelatinous genetic state inside the cell, and we don't know when it will reactivate after hiding, which is indefinite. I have been infected with the pathogen and experienced morbid symptoms. More than 6 months later, the symptoms still persist. For this reason, I believe that only facts based on actual experience rather than medical or biological findings are true. This infection is not a cold. It is pneumonia, which destroys the organs of the lungs. The airway, esophagus and stomach are also targeted. The reasons why it develops, why it is asymptomatic, and why it is so severe are all unknown. But when the symptoms are mild or moderate, there is no cure. To put it bluntly, from the very beginning, we don't know what causes it. Now, we can say that it is a phenomenon. Mankind does not know what exactly causes people to be infected and asymptomatic, as there is no scientific explanation. And even if you are infected, there is no fever. In other words, the immune system is not working and you get pneumonia. And most under-teens or teens do not develop morbid symptoms. It is not a seasonal infection like the flu virus, which is transmitted by migratory birds or pigs. The infection is airborne. Infectivity and growth are extremely high. The mutation frequency is high at the genetic level. It has been found to be easily transmitted from humans to multiple animals of different species. It is probably easily transmitted from animals to humans as well. Once the disease develops, it is not curable. In other words, the immune system cannot cure itself. It feels as if the entire major organs of the human body are affected. Asymptomatic is not a state where the disease is hiding inside the cells, but rather it multiplies inside the body and is said to be infectious. However, if we can figure out why they are asymptomatic even though they are infectious, we should be able to find a cure for them. Most of humanity is probably already infected. He believes that the level of human testing on asymptomatic people is more necessary than a vaccine. The one thing that all countries have in common is that they do not have policies that force them to find asymptomatic people. The number of new infections is proportional to the country's testing limit. In other words, they are dependent on the human resources, money and time required for testing. Newly infected individuals are proportional to the national testing limit. In other words, it depends on the human resources, money, and time required for inspection. In most countries, ambulances are newly infected. In special cases, such as when the person works in a food factory or when the person is a school teacher, the health center investigates close contacts, resulting in an increase in new infections. And when they become infected, they are isolated from society even if they have no symptoms. It has become a social problem because people lose their jobs and their families. Now, no one goes to the hospital because of a cold. Because of the frequent occurrence of such various psychic phenomena, I decided to think about my own treatment problems and measures against infectious diseases in the world. There is a strange story. Looking at vital data, the birth ratio of men and women is a stochastic distribution that is common to all ages, places and regions, and small towns and cities. However, from a biological point of view, more males are born. However, without artificial force on the natural flow, one family will have a girl and another will have a boy, as if the future had been decided. It feels like someone is constantly watching and watching. The front and back of the coin are the same phenomenon as the probability of occurrence. There may be multiple futures, but the world that actually exists is becoming the most even and thermodynamically stable world. Looking at the distribution of infectious diseases around the world, we can see that this infectious disease is endless in human history. Although the source is unknown, the enemy was instantly attacked by an invasion centered on humankind in an unknown way that science cannot explain. There is no way to do it. I'm a loser. Without fighting, there was nothing that could be done. There was no way that human peoples should have done. Peoples couldn't do anything. Lost my way. Nowadays, the cause of the infectious disease is a virus. But I don't know if it is true or not. However, I investigated the causes that can be explained at the human science level. At an early stage, human beings investigated the three-dimensional structure of the receptor binding domain (RBD) of the spike S protein of SARS-CoV-2 and the antibody. The amino acid sequence identity of the SARS-CoV-2 and SARS-CoV-S proteins is approximately 77%. It was identified that 24 residues, which is 86% of the 28 residues epitoped of RBD, are common between SARS-CoV-2 and SARS-CoV. It was suggested that the difference in binding affinity was due to the difference in end-link glycosylation of specific amino acid residues. Sugar chains are added to more than 50% of the proteins contained in animal cells. Proteins undergo various modifications after translation. For example, glycosylation, phosphorylation, methylation, sulfation, glycation and the like. These are important for protein functionality, activation, and maintenance of conformation. In the case of viruses, etc., by adding sugar chains to their own spike proteins, they can escape from the host's immune monitoring mechanism or be captured by lectins that recognize the sugar chains of the host cells, facilitating invasion into the host cells. In some cases, sugar chains are essential for maintaining the three-dimensional structure and function expression of viral spikes. The sugar chains on the host cell membrane are extremely diverse and at the same time have extremely high species specificity. In addition, since all viruses propagate only in host cells, they always have a host cell region and host specificity. When we investigate the mechanism by which a virus exerts host specificity, we find that it often reflects the specificity and diversity of host cell membrane sugar chains as its phenotype. We have clarified the fact that many enveloped viruses recognize and bind to sugar chains in host cell membranes as specific receptors. Furthermore, mutations in the antigenic determination region are extremely likely to occur. Furthermore, considering that the invasion route of infection is the respiratory tract epithelial cells of animals, it becomes difficult to block the invasion of the virus by the antigen-antibody reaction in the bloodstream, considering the circulation of body fluids. Even if a virus with glycoprotein spikes infects and releases the host cell, it is absorbed to the receptor right-pointing arrow invasion right-pointing arrow unshelling right-pointing arrow RNA polymerase. Viral protein synthesis right-pointing arrow sugar chain addition right-pointing arrow delivery by intercellular traffic right-pointing arrow packaging right-pointing arrow. There are various steps such as sprouting right-pointing arrow release of the offspring virus, and a drug that inhibits the activity of proteins involved in these processes will be a future development target as an antiviral drug. It is not known in detail what is involved in every process for any virus. At present, only camostout mesylate has been found to be effective in inhibiting the invasion of SARS-CoV-2 virus among existing substances. In Japan, their Avigan tablets, generic name favipiravir, developed as RNA polymerase inhibitors of influenza virus in mild cases. On September 23, 2020, Fujifilm Toyama Chemical said that it achieved the primary endpoint in the domestic Phase 3 clinical trial of the anti-influenza virus drug Avigan tablets, generic name favipiravir, in patients with new coronavirus infection. Announced, based on the test results, the company plans to apply for partial change approval of manufacturing and marketing approval items by the end of October 2020. At Russian pharmacies, sales of the generic Avifavir, new coronavirus drug for the anti-influenza drug Avigan, based on the Japanese influenza drug Avigan, have begun. More than half of the patients who received the drug improved their symptoms within a week. In any case, nothing's happening but talking like they're big news to overstate. Or exaggeratedly speaking, the biggest mystery is that everyone but myself is asymptomatic.